The Board of Education meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and viewing information can be found on our district website. The meeting is now called to order. It is April 5th, 2023. The time is 6:31 p.m. Our mission is to provide a safe and caring climate and culture in which we engage, inspire, educate, prepare, and empower all learners in partnership with their surrounding community to be successful in today's and tomorrow's society. Zach, can you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And then when you're ready, can you please call roll?
Sure can. Scott Andresen,
Here.
Natalie Copeland,
Here.
Al Dahlgren, Zach Dorholt is here, Shannon Haas,
Here.
Monica Segura-Schwartz.
Here.
And the following board members are not present today, which is Heather Weems. Following cabinet members and staff are present at the district administration office. Superintendent Dr. Lori Putnam, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education Dr. Mike Rivard, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services Amy Scalrud, Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations Tracy Flynn Bowe, Director of Equity Services Ian Omar, Executive Director of Research, Assessments and Enrollment Don Roper, Executive Director of Operations Gary Ganchi, Director of Innovation and Instructional Technology Ryan Cox, Media Technicians Paul Novak and Gordy Scott, Custodian on site Steve Hain. The following cabinet members and staff are virtually present. Director of Community Engagement and Communications Tammy DeLand, Executive Director of Community Education Adam Holm, Executive Assistant Jan McGuire.
Thank you. Then I'm looking for a motion to approve tonight's Board of Education meeting and work session agenda.
So move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Scott, a second by Zach. Zach, can you please call roll again?
Scott Andresen,
Here.
Natalie
Yes.
Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholtz, yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Monica Segura-Schwartz.
Yes.
Next is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of non-controversial items that the board adopts routinely without debate. Any single member may remove an item from the consent agenda by requesting removal at the time the consent agenda is moved for adoption. On tonight's consent agenda, item A, approval of personnel staff changes. Item B, approval of monthly treasurer's report for February 2023. Item C, approval of monthly financial report for February 2023. Item D, board policy 212, school board member development, third reading. Item E, repeal board policy 213.2, school board liaison procedures, third reading. Item F, St. Cloud Area School District 742, resolution for the 2023-2, adoption of Stearns County All-Hazard Mitigation Plan, and item G, government entity settlement agreement. I just want to clarify. Yeah, that's what it says on here too, 2023-2 for the item F. I didn't say that very confidently. I just wanted to check on that. So does any member wish to remove an item from the consent agenda?
F.
Item F is the St. Cloud Area School District 742 Resolution 2023-2, adoption of the Stearns County All-Hazard Mitigation Plan.
Okay.
Okay, Monica? Item G? Okay. Okay. Perfect. So, boy, it's been a long time since we did that. Can we then have a motion to approve items A through F?
So move.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Zach, can you vote for approving items A through F?
Scott Andresen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
And I think Amy is positioning herself to, are you going to help us through item G, Amy?
Yeah, is there a specific question on item G? It's a settlement agreement on a class action lawsuit, and it requires board approval. So if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, what is that? What was the lawsuit? What and is the so I'm confused about who's being sued. We're getting
So it's about 1,500 states and school districts and government entities throughout the country. And so we participate in those quite frequently, where we partner with an organization, who represents and does all of that. And then there's generally an arranged fee where they keep a % of the proceeds, but we incur no cost if there's no settlement. And so this specific is against Juul, related to student vaping.
so. And who decides? So the settlement is. Who decides was the result of the settlement?
So it was a court ordered, based on an actual trial. It actually went through the whole legal process, not locally, obviously. I'm not sure exactly which state the trial occurred in, but it was a formal legal proceeding, and this was the settlement that the judge had awarded based on the claim. And again, it's a number of mostly school districts, but there are some cities and counties that participated as well.
Thank you.
I think Al had a question.
Is this settlement separate from, does the state, let me put it this way, does the state of Minnesota have a separate lawsuit against Juul?
Yes, so the state of Minnesota did not participate in this. There were no states that joined this. They were all individual school districts, counties, and cities.
And are the proceeds available for use for anything, or is it dedicated towards reduction of tobacco-related products?
So the
in
proceeds
schools?
are generally allowable for anything. Our intention is to use them first to do vape detectors at McKinley with the renovation project this summer, so that we can pilot those and see how effective they are and if it's something we'd want to roll out to other buildings. And then the remainder is generally offsetting our supervision personnel costs, knowing that we've had to increase student support personnel and CSOs in supervision time, over the last however many years. Not just for that, but for that, combined with other factors. But there's no reporting back on how funds are used. They're really very general, and they come in over a period of 5 years. So the first payment would come in next year, and then funds will continue to come in through 2028, I believe it was.
Any other questions? Scott?
How much are we talking about each year?
I don't know the amount each year. The gross payment that we should be able to, or that we should anticipate receiving after the fees will be about $125,000, but they don't have a set payment time or schedule by individual claimant yet. It just said that the first payment would be expected in fall of '24. Or sorry, fall of '23.
If you divide that by 5, it'd be about 25,000 a year.
I don't know if it's even, though. I don't know that they're even payments. Some of it might be front-ended. The agreement didn't have that level of detail at this point.
Monica?
So I'm not understanding what you just said to Scott. So if I take 175, that's the total payment, and you take the cost, if you take the 35,000, percent, that is 113? Is that what we're talking about,
Or
113?
120, yeah, I didn't have so maybe it's 100, yeah. And
Divided.
it's about 35%, I think it's not exactly. And there's some additional bonus payments that may be awarded.
But that is what you're dividing over the number of years?
Yeah, And it may not be even, but yeah, that would be the amount that we would expect to receive over the life of the settlement period.
And you said that you're going to do no detectors and what else?
And then the rest would just go back into the general fund to offset operating costs. Unless, at some point in the future, once the funds have actually been collected, if the board had a desire to do something different with them, we could do that. But certainly, until we actually collect the cash, we typically wouldn't formulate a spending plan until funds have been received.
Got it, thank you.
Are vape detectors a high priority item for the district?
So administrators have brought it up, primarily at McKinley. It's really been brought up, and so with the restroom project this summer, we want to pilot that and be able to try it. And we had actually been looking into that prior to being notified of the settlement as an option, exploring costs and the building evaluating if that was something that they wanted to cover the cost of. We reached out to a number of districts, particularly in the metro, who are using them and have found great success with them and have been very happy. So we figure McKinley is a good place to pilot and start as a small building with limited restrooms. It's a fairly low cost. And then if it seems to be effective, then that's something that we could consider rolling out to our other buildings.
What would success be defined as?
That it's being a deterrent, that they work effectively, right? That there's not a lot of false alarms where they're going off when it's something else, and that they feel that it's value, that there's value added, that it's making less work for them and not the opposite. So we'd want to make sure that they're seeing a benefit, because we always want to look at that cost benefit and not just, oh, it's there, but we're spending twice as much time reviewing cameras and, sometimes we can't determine anyway. We don't suspect that's going to be the case based on feedback from other districts, but we certainly don't want to spend an investment, particularly because there's wiring, there's electrical, they require network connections and switches and costs that are pretty minimal for McKinley right now because we're doing a renovation anyway. And so we're already in there and it's a good time, but that cost would be much more significant to go and do that in any of our other buildings. So that's one of the reasons that we wanted to do it, because it's more cost effective to do it while we're in there remodeling this summer.
Are we having problems at McKinley daily or weekly or monthly?
Yeah, I don't know. I assume frequently.
I don't ever want to give the impression that our students are broadly or widely making consistently poor choices. However, I think that it would be a fair characterization to say that that is one of our primary concerns at our high schools, particularly, right, around vaping or use of substances such as that. So I wouldn't characterize it as a McKinley issue or as an epidemic, but it's certainly something that we don't want happening in our schools. We know that impacts learning, it impacts safety. So yes, with those qualifications.
Okay, I'm just kind of surprised to hear that come up here, because I've never heard it come up before as a need. I've never heard anyone say we needed vape detectors. And
I didn't know there was vape detectors.
there you go. So it's like kind of a surprise that would be where we would first choose to spend that money. If it's available for all uses, is that our number one priority is, and if it is, more power to it. That's great. But
I think we'd like to see a multi-pronged approach, right? And I think we've put a lot of resources into chemical health counseling already. You'll see that later this evening. We put a lot of resources into the mental health. I think this is those have certainly been our first priority, but with some additional funding, that kind of more technical, right? Instead of the people engagement relationship, that technical solution, I think, is just one more layer to add into the response that we have already prioritized.
Natalie?
I think this is I didn't know there was vape detectors either. And I'm really glad actually to hear there is. Of anything that I hear my kids talk about, both in middle school and high school, This is the number one thing that they've been offered or have seen someone do, mostly in the bathrooms, sometimes in the locker rooms. And so, I mean, it's not just St. Cloud. This is an epidemic, actually, nationwide. But yeah, so I would love to have us, if it works at McKinley, I would love to have us not only do it at the high school level, but also the middle school because of hearing firsthand stories with that.
The new secret.
Okay, looking for a motion to approve item G then.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Natalie, a second by Monica. Zach, can you call roll?
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Monica Scares Schwartz.
Yes.
Scott Andresen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our one action item for the night. We have the 2023-24 compensatory revenue plan presented by Amy Scallerud, Executive Director of Finance and Business Services.
Thank you. I realized before I sat down, I didn't say good evening. So good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Putnam, board members. This is our annual approval of the compensatory revenue plan. By statute, up to 50% of a district's compensatory revenue can be allocated at the district-wide level as opposed to the site that generates it based on a plan approved by the board. We have, for the last number of years and consistent with the plan for next year, have elected to do 25% of that. And really that allows us to be able to have some consistency in staffing positions like academic support positions, intervention and mental health, and a lot of those things that the funds support consistently from site to site, where some sites may not generate enough money to be able to have that and offer that consistently district-wide. So the amount of the set aside this year is just under 4.5 million. That will fund 48 FTEs, which is a pretty significant increase from the current year plan, just because we're seeing that rebound in compensatory revenue as we transition back to the full paid meals. And so comparatively last year, that holdback was about 3.2 million. So a fair amount of additional funds. The good news with that is that it's allowing us to continue to support everything that was in last year's plan. So you'll see those chemical health positions, some of our behavior resource specialists who do our student support rooms, our formerly academic leads, which are now renamed, but or academic coaches. They now have different names you'll see in the plan, but the goal and the intention of the positions is the same. All of those will continue to be funded, and then in addition, we're able to continue sustained funding for some of the items that we were using ESSER funds to support. So the three main pieces there are additional elementary intervention and support positions that we've been using ESSER funds, additional school resource officers, and then family advocate positions. So there's no new positions that don't exist today. It's just, again, shifting the funding over from ESSER to the compensatory revenue, which is a sustainable funding source. Are there any questions on the compensatory revenue plan?
Scott?
Yeah, what is compensatory revenue based upon? Free and reduced lunch?
Yes, so it's 100% driven by free and reduced concentration. So not just the number of students that qualify for free and reduced, but the per pupil funding amount increases as the percent of free and reduced students in any given building increases.
Okay. The state is going to be putting in free lunch pretty quick. How are we going to figure it up after that?
So the current free meals bill includes a compensatory hold for the following year. So next year's compensatory revenue, the plan that you're approving tonight, is based on this year's count, so that is guaranteed. And then they've given that that hold on this next year's revenue amount going into 24-25, and then after that, they're essentially taking some time to figure out what does that formula need to look like, knowing that we may see the numbers go down because there aren't people filling out applications. So there's a number of of things that have been proposed, whether that's changing the factor, the per pupil amount. But the legislature and the governor have stated that they're committed to making sure that districts don't lose. But again, that will be a waiting game, just like we're a waiting game every 2 years to see what we get in terms of new money. But we know that we're set at least through 24, 25.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, we're looking for a motion to approve the 2023-2024 compensatory revenue plan.
So move.
And I have a second? A motion by Scott, a second by Monica, and yep, Al, go ahead. Oh, I think Monica was just seconding it. So any further discussion? Al,
Yeah,
go
further
ahead.
discussion would be that I think that this is something that we should look at adding to our legislative platform for next year. Because the legislative platform, because they changed this year to that Medicaid-based formula. And at the end of this year now, Medicaid, to qualify for Medicaid is being made more difficult. So they're going to be, because of COVID, they made it easier to qualify for Medicaid. Now at the end of this year, they're dropping those additional qualifications. So less people are going to qualify for Medicaid, which is going to affect compensatory going forward if they don't change that formula. And if they're guaranteeing next year is going to be held the same, it would be the following year that we would see that. And they're going to then turn back and say, well, no, there was no changes to the Medicaid formula last year. It's the same as it was the year before. And it just, something's got to be done to fix that formula and actually enhance that formula.
Right. My understanding is that they're going to use next fall's counts, which would have not only the change in the Medicaid formula factored in, but also the change in people not filling out a paper application necessarily. So if that's the case, and that's what they're going to use as their baseline to revamp the formula, then we should be, looking towards an outcome that would hold districts harmless. If they were to use this year's numbers and start to try to do that, that gets hard. And I suspect, I don't know this in fact, but my best guess is that's part of the reasoning for giving the 1 year hold harmless, so that they have an extra year to work through that and have next year's data as a baseline.
Yep, and hold harmless is wonderful, but this is really where we as a district should be focusing. It's special ed cross subsidy and compensatory revenue, increasing the amount of compensatory revenue, because those are the funds that affect districts like us, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, the districts who have high levels of students who are more expensive to educate. And so we should really focus, I think, on that going forward. But that's for another day, I guess.
Yeah, good thought, though. Okay. Any other further discussion? Natalie?
I can't find it now, but I've read something on the governor's update that they are actually looking at keeping Medicaid formula a little bit the same to what it was during COVID, since 40% of kids are covered by that in Minnesota. So it just came out this weekend though, so I'll look for it, but not that it's gonna be that way forever. So I think we do need to talk about it, but I think they're thinking of extending it because of that reason.
Okay. Okay, thanks, good discussion. Zach, want to call a vote?
Scott Andreessen,
Yes.
Natalie Copeland,
Yes.
Al Dahlgren,
Yes.
Zach Dorholz, yes. Shannon Haas.
Yes.
Monica Segura Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then we're moving on to the 2023-2024 FTE projections based on enrollments and registration. Joining us, Tracy Flambeau, Executive Director of Human Resources and Labor Relations.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, board members, Superintendent Putnam. Tonight is where we give you a snapshot of our staffing process and how that has translated then into the budget basically for staffing for the coming year. And so you see that broken up at the elementary level by grade level and supports, and then at the secondary level by those department areas. If you look at the elementary numbers, and you all have a copy of this in front of you, you see that the most significant change is in grades 1 through 5 and in kindergarten, where you see significant additions of FTE. That is in alignment with Dr. Putnam's commitment to lower class sizes, and particularly at the kindergarten level. And one of the trade-offs for that you see is the reduction in the number of positions of academic leads, which has allowed us to make some of those changes along with other budgetary shifts. So that's really the elementary picture, and then you see those corresponding increases in general music and physical education and art, which are just those prep alignments that go along with those increased number of sections in each of our schools. At the secondary level, you can see that staffing is relatively stable, subtle shifts here and there. The largest changes making up that 2 FTE reduction is in changes in enrollment this year at Apollo, and those changes take kind of a year to catch up to our staffing plans. And so again, the staffing's relatively stable there, and those are the numbers for this year. You see the English language learners there with some slight increases. Nursing is level, and then special education, you see TBD because that is a very complicated process, and we do expect some increases there, but we'll have more information for that as our special ed team completes their work. Any questions?
Scott?
There are people online that don't know what an FTD is. What is it?
Full-time equivalent, so it's a position, basically. 1.0 is a position.
Thank you.
Good question. We talk in acronyms in education, and they,
Way too much, actually.
yes, I know, I've developed the habit.
Okay, any other discussion, questions? All right, thank you, Tracy.
Boy, that's when you cut off
Okay.
an arm or a leg.
And our last discussion item for the night, we have the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee Board Response Letter. This is just a discussion item tonight, and joining us is Donna Roper, Executive Director of Research, Assessments, and Enrollment.
Good evening, Chair Hawes, Superintendent Putnam, board members. My colleague Ayan Omar will be here in a minute. And again, we're just here to provide support and listen. This is your response to APEC recommendations that were provided in March. So we will just sit back and listen and wait to hear what the next steps are.
Does everybody have the letter in front of them? And is this attached on the agenda online for people to see? Okay. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to read it a couple times. Yes. Does anybody have any questions or comments or thoughts as this proposal comes forward then with the edits that were made? And then we're having a official vote next meeting, correct? Okay. Are we all good to go for next meeting? Thoughts? That was way too easy. I know all the hard work was done way before this. So thank you for everybody's patience and commitment to working together to get us to this point. So
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, then we're moving on to reports. We have the Board of Education Standing Committee reports. And I believe we just have one committee, the Board Development Policy and Governance Committee, Scott Andreasen, reporting tonight.
Okay. Our committee met on March 22nd, 2023. Kay Nelson and Mike Rivard reviewed the following board policies with committee members. Board committee members discussed them and made recommendations. We had Board Policy 101, the legal status of the school district. And we'll be bringing that through as a board action item with changes on April 19th. Board Policy number 101.1, the name of the school district. There's been no changes on that policy, and it can be added to the consent agenda on April 19th. Board Policy 102, equal education opportunity. We plan to bring that to the board as an action item with changes on April 19th. And Board Policy 103, expressions of concerns, complaints, conflicts about district employees. We'll be bringing that to the board for review on April 19th. And that's about it. Sure.
And I was there, but I don't remember the exact changes on each of the policies here that we recommended. But when you say we are bringing it to the board as an action item, is it coming to the board as a review, as a discussion item? Because the only way it would come to the board initially as an action item would be if it's no changes and goes to the consent agenda. Is
Right.
that correct?
Right.
So it was just a misspeak that they're coming to the board as a discussion item?
Discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We already see it 3 times.
So at our last meeting, I was suggesting an agenda item for board development and I was wondering if you touched the topic and decided on an action plan or it was forgotten. And my agenda item was to maybe think about a policy about recycling in our schools.
I don't believe I went ahead.
We lack the amount of time to get to it, so we'll be bringing that forward to this next month.
Okay. No. Any other reports? Okay. Then moving on to future agenda items, April regular board meeting topics will include McKinley ALC school presentation, approval of the APAC board response letter, approval of resolutions proposing named staff for non-renewal or placement on unrequested leave of absence, graduation celebratory events and plans, and policy readings. At this time, does any board member want to suggest a future agenda item? Okay.
I had a question. That personnel list, is that on the public board, the personnel changes list? Because I was looking at it like about an hour before the meeting and it wasn't there. And then I looked at it on the board computer and all of a sudden it was.
Are you talking about the non-renewal or on the consent agenda?
On the consent agenda.
Yes, personnel. If it's on the consent agenda, in details, it should be on the agenda online.
It was awfully slow getting there then.
Well, somebody double check that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. From tonight's consent agenda,
tonight's
generally
consent
speaking, it's
agenda.
up there. I would have to,
I
yeah.
I hadn't seen it on the public board.
There isn't
It's-
public and a private board or anything.
I didn't think so.
Yeah.
That's what confused me. And
The only thing online is board book, and that's open to the public and the board, but there is no private board anything. That would be illegal.
yeah, but it's not on there, is it? I saw it about half an hour before. Is it showing theirs?
So we can get somebody to show that to you.
Yeah, I finally found it about 15 minutes before the
Okay.
board meeting.
But-
And it was on our computer, but I never did see it on what goes to the public.
I don't know. What goes to the public that doesn't?
It shouldn't be different. It should be the same.
But I'm not understanding what when you say it like that, it sounds like there's two different systems or something. And there
That's-
isn't. There's only
shouldn't
one
be.
system.
No, there
So I don't
shouldn't
know,
be.
when you say what goes to the public, what goes to the public? I don't know what you're talking about. Board book is where it goes.
Right, and board book
So-
on the computers the laptops we get shows it, but my home computer, when I went to the agenda, did not show it.
Scott, this is my home
Then-
computer.
Okay,
And I'm
Then there's a
showing you
problem
my
then with your
home
home
computer.
computer.
it's
'Cause-
been there for a while.
It's being here.
So, yeah, I feel good about it too, that it is on there. But what we should do is at some point have somebody show you to make sure that you're looking in the same spot that these board members are looking and the public has access to. So anybody out there, yes, that
Yeah,
it
I
is
just-
accessible, and I do feel confident about that. But we want to make sure that you can access it too.
Yeah, because I didn't find it till shortly before the meeting.
Okay.
It's about 3 pages of
Yeah,
changes.
always, yeah.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
just want to make sure that people are clear that there isn't any separate, the only information that we get as board members is the information that's posted publicly on our website. There is no other place for us to get it, so it has to be available publicly, and it is, so,
I hope so.
well, it is.
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Scott, the only thing I use is my work computer. I never turn this one on, the one that's issued to me. I never turn it on. I don't bring it home. I just, they put it on the table here for me, and they take it away. But everything that I do is on my work computer, which is my computer, not theirs,
Yeah.
and it's all available, 100% of it, so.
Yeah, and then Jan prints this out for me, but that's where she's printing it out from, so. Yeah, but more than happy for somebody to show that to you, where that is, because it's possible that you're just looking in the wrong spot. And we want you to be able to see it.
That's certainly quite possible.
Okay, thanks, and we'll make sure that you can view that, so. Okay, so no future agenda items now. I am looking for a motion to adjourn the regular board meeting. That's new.
So moved.
Second.
A second, and any objections to adjourning the regular board meeting? Okay. So are we voting on this, or am I just calling it good? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're trying to follow all the rules here. So, opposed? Okay, meeting is adjourned at 7:08 PM. Opening up our Board of Education work session. And we have 2 items tonight. So first up, a very exciting presentation, the Letters and Literacy presentation. We have Laura Stepner, Director of Elementary Curriculum, joining us.
Good evening. Oh, there we go. Good evening, Chair Haas, Superintendent Putnam, and members of the board. Making sure I got everything ready. I am so pleased to be here tonight to share with you a presentation about how we will be shifting practices to increase student outcomes and literacy in our elementary schools. And I wanted to start tonight with a few headlines. And the reason I start with these is that there is a national conversation happening around literacy. As a nation, we are struggling to produce proficient readers. In fact, the 2022 NAEP results showed that only 32% of fourth graders across our nation scored at the proficient or above level in literacy, which frankly is not acceptable for our nation's children. Literacy is a basic human right, and it unlocks so many future opportunities for our students. In fact, the chances of a student graduating from high school are very clearly predicted by that student's reading proficiency level in 3rd grade. So if we take a look at reading proficiency in 3rd grade, we have a good chance of understanding how likely that student is to graduate from high school. Literacy is essential, it is critical, and yet across our nation, millions of students each year are struggling to learn to read. But these headlines indicate a turning tide. The education profession has often been separated from the research in how the brain learns to read, the scientific research in what's actually happening within our brain and the evidence-based practices that align to the science of reading. And these headlines show that that tide turning means that the education profession is embracing the science. And in that embrace, we're seeing positive and exciting results. Tonight, I plan to share with you a little bit about the state of literacy across our nation and in our district, an introduction to the science of reading, and an overview of how we will equip our teachers with the evidence-based practices that align to the scientific knowledge about how the brain learns to read that leads to proficient reading. So I wanted to give us this quote as a grounding. The National Reading Panel shared in the year 2000 that research has proven that 95% of all students can learn to read. And you'll note the asterisk, which indicates students with significant cognitive disabilities. So we have research that shows us that 95% of our population is capable of learning to read. And yet we see 2/3 of our nation's 4th graders not scoring in that proficient range. There's a disconnect between what we know in research and what's happening in our classrooms across the whole country. This indicates data from pre-COVID. I like to make sure we call out this was pre-COVID, 2017 to 2019. And it's showing the states and the progress that they made over those 2 years. What you're going to notice is that there's only one state that showed gains in their reading performance. We see 17 states that decreased and 34 states that stayed stagnant. So we're not talking about students coming out of the pandemic with this data, we're talking about pre-pandemic data. And this is really something that gave me quite a bit of pause to see that we have brilliant educators all across the nation working with students, trying to figure this out, making sure our students are equipped with what they need, and yet only one state is truly seeing those gains. The state of Mississippi has embraced the science of reading and has actually committed to training all of their teachers across the state in this instructional background, and they've seen really great gains, and they attribute their success to bringing the science of reading practices into classrooms. And those practices are critical. Pedro Negura says the real gap we don't close is the one between research and the practices. And when we think about gaps, we talk about them a lot in education. We talk about achievement gaps, we talk about all kinds of gaps, but this is an essential gap to pay attention to. What does the research say? And then what happens in the classrooms? And if we don't close that gap, we won't change things for our students. This is just a quick picture of our reading proficiency rates over the last several years. And what you're going to notice is that there are some decreasing score proficiencies. If we look from 2017 to 2021-22, we see the proficiency rate in reading decrease. We also see a gap between 742's results and the state level. And we see some increases, right? We see some areas of promise. We see things to celebrate in this data set. But we don't see 95% of our students proficient in reading at the state level or at the district level. We see that we have gains to make and that we owe it to our students to be able to make those gains. And that's really what we're aiming to do with our shift in literacy practices at the elementary level. Before we jump into the science of reading, I want to unpack a few myths about learning to read because I think these are fascinating. I've been deep in the science of reading and I love talking about it and reading about it and learning about it, but some of these myths are pretty prevalent in our general population, with parents, and even with our teachers, that these things are myths because some of them feel really true. So the first myth is that reading is primarily a visual memory task. If you've got kids of your own, you probably can remember flashcards, right? And what seems to be happening is you show the flashcard, the child memorizes the word, they can read the word. But science has shown us that's not what's happening in the brain as we read. It's not memorization. That's a different sort of brain process than learning to read. There is also a myth that children can read in multiple ways, that there's lots of ways we can teach kids to read, and those can be varying degrees of success, but that's really not true. The human brain, no matter whose brain it is, learns to read in the same way. The pace of acquiring that skill might look different, but the literal processes that have to be developed in the brain are the same. This one, reading develops naturally, right? We all know someone who seemed to read as if by magic. We all know someone who doesn't know how they learned to read, it just clicked. And in those cases, it does really feel like it was just this natural process, this magical thing that occurred, but that's not the case. Those same processes that have to happen in each individual human brain happened for that magical reader too, they just happened more quickly. And our human brains are not genetically wired to read print. So when we think about all of human evolution, right, print is a fairly new thing that humans have been able to comprehend text. We are genetically wired to understand speech. Nobody has to sit us down and say, here is how you process verbal speech. But reading is not something that we pass down genetically, and we're not genetically wired to do. We must actually rewire our brain to be able to read. And this last one, that children learn to read by being read to and having access to books. This certainly helps students. This certainly is a fantastic practice, but this alone will not lead to proficient readers. We can't surround students by books and ensure that they will become readers and writers and be able to be successful in the world outside our school. So we're going to dig into a little intro to the science of reading. I'm going to share some visual models and some background. Now I want you to know there is a lot to the science of reading, and we can't do it all tonight, so you're just going to get the tip of the iceberg, but I hope you enjoy it. We're going to start with this definition that comes from the Reading League, and I think it's really critical to ground us in a definition. So the science of reading is a little bit of a buzzword right now. There are some misconceptions related to the science of reading, and we'll talk a little bit about what the science of reading is not. But this definition from the Reading League is pretty thorough, but I want to read it out loud to us just because I think it helps us really understand what is it we're talking about when we say the science of reading. So the science of reading is a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. This research has been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world, and it is derived from thousands of studies conducted in multiple languages. The science of reading has culminated in a preponderance of evidence to inform how proficient reading and writing develop, why some have difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach and therefore improve student outcomes through prevention of and intervention for reading difficulties. You can see it's big and it's deep. And it comes from many fields. So the science of reading is not a field in and of itself. There isn't a body of researchers who are all working in the science of reading. It comes not only from education and special education, but from cognitive psychology, communication science, developmental psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, implementation science, and school psychology. So that 5 decades of research coming from 9 different branches of science help to make up the science of reading. But even though we have a definition, the science of reading also has some things that it's not. It's not an ideology or a philosophy, right? It's coming from all these areas of science about the brain, how it learns to read, what are the evidence-based practices that lead to proficient reading and that prevent reading difficulties. It isn't a pendulum swing. So in education, we're famous for those, but this isn't something we've done before and it'll go away and we'll do again. It's that really strong trajectory of 50 years of research being put into classroom practices. We are always looking for a one-size-fits-all, and unfortunately this won't be it either, so we can't just count on it being the perfect one-size-fits-all. And it's not a program. I can't call a curriculum company tomorrow and say I'd like to purchase Science of Reading, that it doesn't exist. And it isn't a single specific component. And I call out phonics here because there is some misconceptions that science of reading and phonics are synonymous, but they're not. So phonics is definitely a part of science of reading, but science of reading and phonics are not the same thing. So now we're going to get into some visual models related to the science of reading. And the first comes from Nancy Young, who works in the International Dyslexia Association. And I know when I saw this graphic for the first time, it rang so true to me because it aligned with what I experienced as a classroom teacher. So what Nancy shares with us is that there is about 5% of the population who reads almost effortlessly, right? These are our kids who read as if by magic. Just like athletics, arts, all the things that humans can do, there seems to be a certain population that does things really quickly, naturally, like they were born to do it. And the same is true with reading. For 35% of the population, they learn to read relatively easy with broad instruction. So we are able to give broad instruction in reading, touch on comprehension, vocabulary, phonics, and about a third of kids will do fairly well. But then it gets to be very different. For 40 to 50% of our readers, if they don't have code-based, explicit, systematic, sequential instruction, they will struggle to learn to read. And why this hit home for me in the classroom was because I delivered broad-based reading instruction, and I had successful students. I did not have training in the science of reading, but I did have students who responded to my instruction, but not all of them. And as a teacher, sometimes it's easy to say, it's not me, right? It's working for these kids. And it will for about a third of our kids. But the fact of the matter is I wasn't giving kids what they needed because I didn't know how to do that. And for our dyslexic population, not only do they need this strategic instruction, they need multiple exposures to it in order to learn to read. What's really important about this graphic is what you see on the right. So we have students who absolutely require this type of instruction to become readers, but all students are advantaged by it. So even though that 35% was doing fine in my classroom when I wasn't delivering this, they would have done better with it. So there isn't a population of readers that doesn't benefit from the science of reading type instruction and the best practices. The science of reading has some great visual models, and I want to unpack a few of them for you tonight. And the first is the simple view of reading. And this really means that reading comprehension needs two things in order to occur. First, word recognition, literally being able to read the words on the page, multiplied by language comprehension, understanding what you read. The product is reading comprehension. Makes sense. This doesn't seem to be rocket science, but it gets a little bit more interesting when we think about how not having some of these pieces in place impacts students. So this slide is going to break down this mathematical formula a little differently. Now, what you need to know is that this is an analogy. It's not a literal mathematical formula, but it helps to illustrate what happens for students when pieces are missing. So the first one that you see on the top left is a picture of a student who is struggling to decode words. When their text is in front of them, they're not able to sound out words. They don't have the strategies to be able to crack the code of literacy, but they have language comprehension. When you read to them, they can talk about the text, they can explain it to you, they can engage in high-level conversations with lots of great vocabulary. But 0 times 1 is 0. Without the word recognition in place, this student will not achieve reading comprehension no matter how strong their language comprehension is. When we move across the screen, we can see the reverse is true. This is a student who can decode. They can sound out the words, they're able to make sense of the code itself, but they don't have the language comprehension. One of the most profound things that I learned as I studied the science of reading is that you cannot understand in print what you do not understand in speech. This makes sense logically, but I don't know that I'd ever thought of that before. And so when a student doesn't have the language comprehension and the vocabulary, it doesn't matter how great they are at sounding out words. 1 times 0, still 0. The bottom is the one that I think is the most interesting, because I think this is where a lot of students lie, and I think this is where we get that 2/3 of 4th graders who really struggle. They have some skills in word recognition, 0.5, let's say, half the skills they need. And they have some skills in language comprehension. But reading becomes very laborious for these students to constantly be unpacking and trying to figure out how to decode the words, loses some of the meaning, and when they finally decode them, they might not remember what they read before that, or they misdecode, pronounce words wrong in their head, skip over words. And look at the product. It's less than the 2 pieces, right? So having half of what I need in word recognition and half of what I need in language comprehension only gives me about a fourth of what I need when it comes to reading comprehension. We need students to be strong in both. 1 times 1 is 1, and that's what we're aiming for. So now, board members, you get to have some simulation experiences about what it feels like when you might be missing a piece. So are you ready to read some Greek? All right, so I'm going to pop over to a video that's in a different system, otherwise I would have embedded it. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to engage in just about, I think it's about a 2 to 3 minute lesson on reading Greek. As we go through this lesson, I want you to pay attention to what you feel and experience as you work to read Greek.
What's it like for beginning readers trying to break the code? You've probably heard the expression, "It's Greek to me," to describe something incomprehensible. Well, think about that as you move through this next exercise. Stay in touch with the feelings you have in response. Think how you might feel in a class of 24 fellow students who seem to be getting it faster than you are. Let's start our lesson with a little initial instruction.
Today, students, we're going to learn some reading with our Greek alphabet. Now, all of you attended college, and some campuses probably had Greek sororities and fraternities. Some of you may even have belonged to those Greek houses. So, I'm assuming you're already familiar with some letters of the Greek alphabet. Here's the first letter for us to learn. This is the Greek letter sigma that spells the S phoneme. Some of you may know this from math, too, because it stands for sum. Here's another letter that many of you know. This is the Greek letter pi, which spells the P phoneme. This is another term you probably already know from math. So, you already know 2 Greek letters and the sounds that they spell. One more Greek letter that you already know is mu, the Greek letter that spells m. It's exactly like the English letter M. With this background knowledge, you should have no trouble reading this short Greek passage from decodable text.
So how was that? Did you get some of it? Maybe you need more time or more letters to work with. A vowel may help.
Alpha spells the A phoneme. But remember, upper and lowercase letters may not be the same. Here's the lowercase alpha. Ready to read the text? Were you?
Oh, he's going to freeze. And we'll stop there because it doesn't want. He just asks you how you're doing, so you're not missing much. So I'd actually like you to maybe be a little bit vulnerable and share with me, did anyone feel frustrated? Anybody? Did anybody feel like you should be getting it? It should be easier? No? Did anyone give up?
Yeah.
So you're grown-ups, you have coping skills, and you have literacy skills. You're not a first grader, right? So I think this is so profound to think about how that 2-minute experience as adults can really model for us how easy it can be to shut down, where we have so many skills and resiliency areas that we can draw from, but our students may or may not have that. So now let's take a look at the other side of that, language comprehension. So here's a paragraph. This comes from the Lexia Letters Manual, and we'll talk about Lexia Letters in just a little bit. But go ahead and give this a read to yourself. So if you're like me, you probably could pronounce all of those words, but really may not have a whole lot of background knowledge on a signifying rupture, or lines of segmentarity, or over-signifying breaks, right? So here's an example of the simple view of reading where we can recognize the words, but without knowing the background and the vocabulary, our reading comprehension is impacted. We probably wouldn't be able to explain to somebody else the meaning of this text. So we are in that 0 times 1 is 0. We maybe have a little bit of it, we could get a gist, but without the vocabulary and background knowledge to bring to the text, we're not successful in comprehending it as readers. And this goes into the Scarborough's reading rope, which is another model from the science of reading. And what this shows us is that in the areas of language comprehension and word recognition, there are various subskills. Language comprehension consists of vocabulary, background knowledge, literary knowledge, where word recognition is more of the decoding and sight recognition. When the readers are first starting to read, they're very separate skills. So you can see the rope on the end is separated. Kids are just learning these things individually, but as we become more proficient readers, these braid together, so to speak, another analogy, and become more strategic and more systematic, so that as a skilled reader comprehends text, they don't really have to be mindful of decoding or their background knowledge or their vocabulary. It's all happening automatically to lead to that skilled reading comprehension. The reading brain is another fascinating part of the science of reading because it really shows for us all the things that have to happen in our brain in order to read. And these are pretty recent developments. The brain scans and neuroscience that we have today can show us what our eyes do, what areas of the brain lights up when we're reading, when we're learning new words. And what's important to know is there isn't one part of the brain that's responsible for recognizing words. That doesn't exist. All these areas of the brain need to be activated and working together in order for us to read. So I'm reading a book for fun about the science of reading, and it's literally 4 pages. Italicized small little text that explains what happens in the brain when you're reading. But I'm going to try to give you just a little tiny bit of it to illustrate this piece that's called orthographic mapping. And this is where we literally learn a word and are able to hold it so that we can recall it automatically. And you may think we've memorized it, but we learned already that that's not the case. So for example, the word brain. The first time you and I learned to read the word brain, we had to sound it out. We had to look at each individual letter. We had to go slow. We had to blend sounds. Once we were able to decode the word brain, we had to connect that to meaning. We had to be able to say, do I understand that word in speech? Oh, I do. That's the brain. Yep, it's in my head. Probably the next 3 to 10 times that we encountered that word, that same process had to happen. But what's happening is your brain is literally building a superhighway for that word, connecting the part of the brain that recognizes symbols, the part of the brain that connects symbols to sounds, the part of the brain that works to blend those sounds together and connect them to a word that you know in speech, all have to work together to essentially build a superhighway. But once that highway's been built, once that word's been orthographically mapped, it doesn't go away. So for you and I, when we read the word brain, it seems like it's automatic and magic because we've built that superhighway. And pretty much all that can take that away is a traumatic brain injury. So when we know exactly what has to happen in the brain in order for students to learn to read, we can design our instructional practices to match that. Now, there is a gap right now in our schools between the research and the practices, and that's what we hypothesize is leading to the current proficiency levels across our nation and our state. And there's a couple of reasons that are cited for this gap between what we know in science and what happens in classrooms. The first is that many states, most of them in fact, don't require our pre-service teachers to master science of reading in order to get a teaching license. So that's one component. A second component is higher ed. And there have been some studies that have been done on higher ed to try to figure out how prevalent the science of reading is in preparation. What those studies have found is that nearly 40% or 60%, over 60% of prep programs don't teach the science of reading. That 3 out of 4 teachers who come out of teacher prep say they were not given instruction in the essential components of reading in order to be prepared, and that over half of them really say they were not prepared to teach reading. There was a recent study who looked at 72 programs to align them to the science of reading. And the designers of this study knew that the science of reading wasn't particularly prevalent in higher ed. And so they did set the bar a bit low to determine whether or not a program aligned with the science of reading. But even with that low bar set, there were only 11 programs that hit that criteria, and a third of them did not mention the science of reading. So when we think about our teachers who are coming to us newly trained, and even me, who was trained quite a long time ago, that science of reading hasn't been part of what teachers are coming out of their teacher prep programs having intact. There are some other reasons as well, and some of this has to do with curricular resources. So unfortunately, there are some very prominent and popular reading programs across the US that are not based in the science of reading. Fortunately, here in District 742, that is not what we use for our elementary literacy curriculum, but the authors of these programs do have lots of trade books, lots of resources for teachers, and so there are many teachers who have really embraced some of these practices that are not in line with the science of reading through some of their own research and some of their own training to try to figure out what works for kids. The other side of this is balanced literacy. Balanced literacy is a very popular approach to reading curriculums, and here in District 742, we do use a balanced literacy program. Balanced literacy programs in and of themselves are not bad things. They really offer a wide variety of tools for teachers, but the challenge is it's almost like a choose your own adventure. So if you don't have that deep knowledge base in what is critical in the science of reading, you are making choices that may not align with what kids would need most at that time in their reading. And so these balanced literacy approaches have the components there, but teachers really need to leverage their own knowledge and skill set to use them well to impact student achievement. Now, Louisa C. Moats is an expert in the field of literacy, and she has this quote that is profound. The demands of competent reading instruction and the training experiences necessary to learn it have been seriously underestimated, right? I'm living proof of this. I had a serious lack of training that I needed in order to have students be proficient readers in my classroom. Luckily for me, I taught 5th grade. I wasn't teaching kids in 1st grade how to decode. However, I can think of many 5th grade students who are struggling readers who I used the resources I had and worked tirelessly to change their path and did not find success because I wasn't equipped with what I needed to have in place in order to change that trajectory for students. I saw some growth, but it was pretty limited because I truly didn't know what it was that I should do to change their path. Our state of Minnesota is also paying attention to the research and the conversation around the science of reading. And in the proposed Minnesota READ Act, we see called out that districts do need to be moving to evidence-based reading instruction that is based on research that applies rigorous, systematic, and objective procedures. So we're called upon by our state to move our instruction as well. And this is in line with exactly what we plan to do in District 742. So I'm thrilled to share with you our plan for making sure that our teachers have access to the practices aligned to the science of reading. We will be moving towards LETRS, Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling training for our elementary teachers. This is an in-depth and thorough training. It's not a one-day workshop. It's not an online module. It is going to take us 3 years of dedicated time in order to go deeply into the science of reading. We will onboard new teachers each year so that we can continue to make sure that our staff is trained in the science of reading. And we will be training anyone who supports students in their reading. So K-5 teachers, EL teachers, we're going to identify special education teachers and any elementary staff, interventionists, and so on that really support the reading instruction in our schools will be accessing this training. I mentioned earlier that LETRS is much more, or the science of reading is much more than phonics, so I just wanted to give you a snapshot of the 8 modules that teachers will engage in. And you'll notice that phonics is definitely there, but we're talking about writing, spelling, reading comprehension, vocabulary, even oracy is part of LETRS. So teachers over these 3 years will engage in these 8 modules and will have deep, deep training in all components of literacy instruction. If you know anyone who's doing LETRS, there are quite a few teachers across the state. The Minnesota Department of Ed 2 years ago started a program that teachers could begin. We have about 20 staff that started up in January, and LETRS is time intensive. It does take quite a bit of time for teachers, but as a district, we have committed to providing that for our teachers. We're not going to ask our teachers to use their weekends and evenings to engage in LETRS training. We're going to build the time into their contractual day in order to engage in the reading, the online modules, and the discussion and processing that's part of the program. We're also blessed to be able to add our own facilitators to this so that we can really tailor the processing and the application to the students that we serve, and we can leverage our experts here in District 742 to tailor and differentiate the instruction and discussion that staff have to meet the needs of their students. And we're going to be able to offer lane change credit for those teachers who are interested. We're asking teachers to embark on a lot of learning, and so we want to honor that with giving them the opportunity to have some lane change credit if they desire that. Like I said, our timeline will take 3 years, so we'll start slow. We'll do 2 units this next year and really get our feet wet, but then we'll accelerate our pace a bit and move to 3 units each year following that to complete the letters training. We have specific outcomes, and we know that outcomes don't become a reality unless we put supports in place. So I want to walk through for all of you just a bit about what we expect to see changing, but then how we will support those changes in our system. So first and foremost, we expect to see the increase of evidence-based practices, systematic instruction, increase in foundational skills, comprehension instruction modifications. In order to support our teachers, we will put 2 teams in place, a district leadership team and a letters advisory team. So staff who have already done letters who can be our guideposts. They will be looking at our practices and our resources, and they will be helping us identify the changes we need to make based on the new learning that we receive. We also will be using the grade level academic lead positions to coach and model and support the recommendations from these literacy teams. These positions will be specific to 1 to 2 grade levels, so they're really able to hone in and support teachers strategically with the assessments, the instructional strategies, and the curriculum at their grade level. We also know that minutes are precious and they're important, so we need to think critically about how we use our time. We want to make sure that we allocate time to where it's most impactful and that we do so strategically, and it looks different in different grade levels. We currently have a task force meeting about the elementary instructional minutes. That team will be making recommendations, but our district literacy team will continue to review that. Are the recommendations we made working? Is there anything we need to monitor and adjust? We will discontinue practices that are not aligned to the science of reading. We know that those practices may be well-intentioned. We know that they may be embedded, but we also know that they're not advancing our readers. So to support our staff, we will train them in new effective practices. And if our staff is coming to us saying, we need additional resources to be able to implement this new learning, we need to be able to commit to providing them the resources that they need to deliver the instruction aligned to the science of reading. We also need to focus on decodable texts in the early grade levels. So again, reviewing our resources to make sure we have what we need. And we need to focus on continual early intervention alongside prevention. So not only will our grade level academic leads model, support, and coach, they'll also help analyze data, help design interventions, help teachers understand how they can modify their instruction to meet the needs of their class and small groups of students. And our elementary is committed to intervention positions, thinking about those dyslexic students who need multiple repetitions. We know that solid classroom instruction will be advantageous to them, but we know that there's a population of students who will need more than that, and that's where intervention positions and classroom interventions can come in. As a board, you can expect a few things from this. First of all, you can expect that we will have an implementation plan with specific practice changes. As staff complete a unit of letters, we'll be able to say, now that you have this new learning, here's what that looks like in the classroom. Here's your lead who can support you and coach you through that if this is a new practice for you. We also will need to change our assessment practices. We will need to measure more granularly and more frequently to understand the impact that letters is having, and that may require us to look at some different assessment tools. We know that dual immersion is a commitment from our district, and so what you can expect is that we will look at the best practice research in both the science of reading and dual immersion to bring both of those together. So our students who are in dual immersion classrooms are accessing the best of dual immersion research and the best of science of reading research. We will continue to collaborate with our SCEA partners so we have a good understanding of how our teachers feeling, are we meeting their needs, what kinds of support do they need as they go through this training. And you can expect incremental changes over time. I highlighted Mississippi and I shared with you that they embraced the science of reading, but it was about 5 years before they saw the results that they're seeing now. And what we know from the research is that it does take about 5 years to train and implement a large school system to move into this full implementation of science of reading. So we expect to see incremental changes over time, but we also expect to know that it will take time. Louisa C. Moats, who is one of the authors of Letters, also tells us that informed teachers are our best insurance against reading failure. While programs are very helpful tools, programs don't teach, teachers do. We are investing in our teachers. We are saying our teachers are who makes the difference. Our teachers haven't been given everything that they need, and that means by no fault of their own, their students are not able to get everything that they need. So by embarking on this letters journey and digging into the science of reading, we are able to really have a clear path forward to changing literacy outcomes for our students. So you got to hear a ton from me, but it's always way better to hear from our teachers. So I want to share with you a quick video with 3 of our teachers who have been embarking on letters for almost 2 years. These 3 staff members are almost done, and what they have to say about how letters changed their teaching is profound.
Letters is a program that trains teachers in the science of...
I don't know why it's not showing. That's weird. Yeah, do you want to try it, Kay? Yep, I'll get out of there. Thank you. Otherwise, I can get the YouTube link. I just had it embedded. You have to see it. It's so good. Oh, good. Thank you.
Letters is a program that trains teachers in the science of reading. Letters is a program that trains teachers in the science of reading. LETTERS stands for Language Essentials for the Teachers of Reading and Spelling. It's a program that connects instructional practices to the science of reading and really helps teachers bring into their classrooms the exact practices that align with how the brain learns to read.
I work primarily with teachers to support their instruction. Letters just really gives us the knowledge and the power to understand what they need. When students are being challenged in reading, we can kind of be detectives and look at, what might they need in terms of intervention and other support so that they can get where they need to be and be proficient readers. It was really exciting for me. I took classes in reading instruction, and it was a lot about the activities that you might do and how to do a good read aloud. I never really felt like I had the knowledge of this is how a student learns to read. Yeah, there is a certain way that the brain needs to learn that. As humans, we're not wired to just look at print and understand the meaning. Letters has just given me the knowledge of what needs to happen in terms for our students to read.
Letters training has made me a more confident teacher of both reading and phonics for my students. It has given me the knowledge base to teach reading to every student, even those that are struggling with some of the basic concepts of reading. I think the most important thing is that I can know right away where my students are at, what they need, and what I need to provide for them, so that everyone can learn to read. I think that teachers should be excited to start letters learning because it changes everything you do. I've been teaching for 25 years. I thought that I knew how to teach reading, and this has completely changed my thinking and how I do everything. It will just give you confidence. It will give you the knowledge you need. It gives you the tools that you need to work with all the students. It's a game changer.
I have changed so many things using the letters training, more phonics based, a lot of phonemic awareness, pulling anything I can and any second I can, getting kids to hear the sounds instead of just see the sounds, or seeing them on the paper but hearing it and manipulating the sounds. That's the biggest difference letters training has done for my teaching. You should be very excited to start this training. I wish I would have had it 30 years ago when I started teaching. It's a class everybody should have. I taught reading for 33 years already, and I still, when I took the training, look at all the tabs in the book. And it's not going to go away. It isn't a program that's going to come and go. It is the foundation and the science of reading. I teach the kids the bridges. You learn it here, you have to get it back here, and you have to keep building the bridges. And they just grab onto that. It is incredible. I wish I could go back and teach all 33 years again. It's that good.
See, they say it better than I do, don't they? So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have about our literacy practices and our changes in elementary.
Zach?
I guess more of a comment than a question was, I listened to the podcast, the
Sold a story.
Sold the Story, and was blown away. So if anybody hasn't heard it, it is
You can unhear it.
Yeah, you can't. Just to know how much we've been doing incorrectly nationwide for so long. So just kind of relieved to know we're making this shift to something that actually works. So thanks.
You're welcome.
I have a question, and I don't know if it's to Zach or change the higher education. So when people are getting a teaching degree, how do we fix that?
I don't know if I have the answer to that.
Zach, do you?
I think we have to communicate, right? We have to communicate with our partners. We have to, when we think about education, there's so many cycles, right? There's the cycle of our middle school teachers who say elementary's not preparing, and elementary who say early childhood's not preparing, and early childhood who says parents aren't preparing. But the same thing happens, in the higher ed K-12, right? Higher ed saying, the students you're sending us aren't prepared, and us feeling like the teachers you're sending us aren't prepared, right? So I think it's that clear communication, and it's not a fight, right? We're all part of it. We all have the same goals. We all want literate, proficient readers. So being able to communicate the urgency and the real true need that we have in K-12 to have our teachers come to us with this. But if they don't, we've developed a path, and we've said, this is what we need, this is what they'll get.
Them though. Monica, and then I think Al had his hand up.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm really, really excited about this. I have several questions in many different levels. I'm gonna try not to ask them all. The first question that I have is that what is this code-based, explicit, systematic, and sequential?
Right. So really it's that when students are learning to read, it can't be haphazard, right? There's a very specific sequence in how we teach students the skills. So at the end, you heard Carol Ramler, the last teacher, talk about kids need to see the sounds, they need to hear the sounds. And so for students, when we're explicit, we do things like tell them how their mouth feels when they make the sound. Kids can get sounds mixed up, B and D, for example. One of the practices teachers will learn in letters is getting mirrors and having kids literally see how does your mouth feel, learning the difference between voiced and unvoiced sounds, learning the specific spelling patterns. Why do some words that end in G have an E at the end, and why don't others? And so for many adults, some of these things are sort of picked up naturally as we learn to read and have more practice. But if we want to be impactful and efficient with students, we literally have to explicitly teach them the rules of our language, teach them what their mouth does, and do so in a specific order so that we're not just randomly pulling, this day we'll do this day we'll do this. Like we are aligning our instruction with how the brain needs to learn the skills and in the order that they need to learn those skills.
So a follow-up with that question is, so this science, the science of reading, is an international science. It's not the science of reading in English.
Right, that's correct. Yep. There is a little bit when we think about like Chinese immersion, right? So if it's a character-based language, there are some nuances to character-based language. However, if we're talking about German, French, Dutch, alphabetic languages, the science of reading is the same across those languages.
Spanish, which is phonetic.
Correct.
So if a kid learns how to read, let's say in those languages that you just mentioned, that are kind of the same, how likely is the kid to read in a different language or in one of other language? How that process work, the learning of the other language?
Right. So I think I can speak a little bit to some of the work we've been doing with preparing for some shifts in our dual immersion programming. What we know is that when students are given the opportunity to compare languages, what's the same and what's different, that is a really impactful practice. So as of this, just I think it was yesterday, we were talking about science of reading and talking about dual immersion, and the benefits that students will have when we say, here is a letter that we see in English, it makes this sound. Now let's talk about Spanish at the same time, where Spanish doesn't become, we have separate Spanish phonics over here and separate English phonics over here. We do teach both, but we have a really specific part of our instruction that is that transfer, that where students identify similarities and differences, it makes their brain really own those languages and be able to leverage their skills in one language across another language. So that's the area of expertise that I have more in that dual immersion. If it's somebody who's learned to read in Spanish and then moves and is trying to learn to read in English, I do know that if you're literate in your first language, it's much easier to take on a second language. But I don't know necessarily how easy that is or exactly how that works in the brain.
Yeah, I was going to ask the hard question about the highway that is being built there.
Yeah.
Because there are people that forget their native language when they
don't use it.
When they don't use it, yes. So I was curious about that, but okay, we don't need to go to that. The reason why I was asking about the other language is because we tell parents that are not native in English to read to their children, and it goes to the myth that you were talking about the kids that are read to, they learn more to read, and it's just like a fraction of it. But that is widely taught yet and widely said to parents.
And it is important for parents to do. It builds that language comprehension piece, right? Every time a parent reads to their child has an opportunity to understand a word in speech, which they then will more likely understand in print. But what we can't do as a school system is say, we'll do a lot of great read alouds and put books in the hands of kids and they'll magically be proficient readers. For parents, one of the best things they can do is read aloud to their child because it builds that language comprehension and it equips children when they come to school and get that phonics code-based phonetic instruction to pair those two together. So it is a great practice, but that alone is not going to teach kids to read.
And the other part of that is that if the parents don't speak English, some things that we tell them is to tell them stories or to talk to them in their native language and to use the language that is stronger at home. So is that part of the same comprehension part?
Right. Anytime we're building language, we're helping students because even if we're building their native language, it allows them to then make those connections as they learn English. Oh, that's the word for this word that I own in my native language. If I don't own that word in my native language, I don't have that same hook in my brain to say, oh, I'm learning a new English word and I have the equivalent in my native language.
Thank you. So now I'm going to another type of questions. So this is, so how many teachers do we have right now that are trained in letters?
We don't have a whole lot right now nobody's fully trained because, well, there might be a couple because the first cohort that they went through by choice, and that was something through the Minnesota Department of Ed. So districts were just notified, hey, this is a great training. The Minnesota Department of Ed funded it a limited amount. So it was a first come, first serve basis. And so we had maybe about 20 staff jump on that MDE track, and they will be finishing up letters this summer. We do have another cohort of early adopters, and so these are folks that we reached out to. They were reading interventionists, folks that were really steeped in teaching students to read, and that was their primary role. Some of our secondary reading interventionists, they began in January. So I think between those two groups, we have maybe 35 staff who are already engaged in letters.
And you said that you're going to show us a plan about how that's going to be rolled out, and I figure that the plan has the investment on it and everything. So that plan has not been developed yet, or is in the works?
So the stages that we're in right now is collecting information and artifacts from districts who are a little bit further than us, but we want to do this as a district literacy team. So we have multiple stakeholders, teachers who have gone through letters, teachers who haven't, administrators, literacy coordinators. We want to have dyslexia representation, special ed, EL, so that we can really come together and say, what is it that our goal should be? The nice thing about letters is you can do an implementation plan for the classroom in chunks. When teachers finish Unit 1, then we can say, okay, we can be front loading and saying, what are the practices we would expect to change at the end of Unit 1, but give our teachers the time to learn before we're expecting them to change. Okay, you've learned this new content, this is what that means for your classroom. Now we move into Unit 2. So because we have these teachers who are in various stages, they're actually really a powerful resource. So there's a teacher at Clearview, and every time I go to Clearview, we have the greatest conversations. But what she offers to me is all the questions she didn't have answers to as she was going to letters, going through letters kind of as an island. So she's like, when I got done with Unit 1, I needed to know, I was wondering about this and this and this, and I wanted to change that, but I wasn't sure how, and I wished I would have had this resource. So we really have this great opportunity to take those folks and say, all right, help us understand what teachers are going to be asking and how we can be proactively planning ahead of our teachers to support them when they get to the end of each chunk of learning.
So the question that I have is kind of for Tracy or Lori. So one of the questions that I have is that I'm thinking that once we train these teachers, they're going to be highly sought out, and they're also going to be more expensive. Is that true? And what are we thinking about that? No? Okay, Zach, go ahead.
I think what we will expect is that we're not the only district in this work, right? We already know that our surrounding districts are doing letters training, or Corey, Sauk Rapids, Sartell. And so I don't think this will be unique to our district.
Okay, cool.
And we're also, as I think Laura mentioned, offering our staff the opportunity to gain graduate credits and do lane changes and providing this training during the workday for them. And so I think there are all sorts of incentives for our staff to do this training with us and to remain as tenured teachers in our district.
Okay. I'm curious about Zach's question.
Just kind of goes to the point where Shannon, back to college, and I'm assuming, this is a shift nationwide. People are jumping on board, so I'm assuming this is what education incoming teachers will start to have already.
That's what we hope. But what is exciting as a curriculum director is this is, and I haven't been one for 100 years, but this is one of the first times where I feel like everybody is on board and really working together to figure this out. So when I go to my network meetings, in the past it would be, oh, we're trying this, we're doing this, but now the conversation about literacy is really streamlined and it's really robust, and it's like everybody's on the same team, everybody's embracing the science, and as an education profession, I've been so embraced by colleagues who've said, this is what we've figured out, come and visit us. Anoka has the same curriculum that we do, but they're a little bit ahead. So come for a site visit, we'll share everything we have, right? So there's just this really great collaborative spirit around the science of reading in the state of Minnesota right now, and it's refreshing.
Wow, that's so cool to hear. All right, thank you.
Pardon my ignorance, I don't know if I really know what my questions are or mean, but I have a couple. Somewhere, this must be rolled out 100%. I'm not talking about in our district, I'm just saying somewhere out there has to be a school or district that's been using this for a while.
Yep.
What are the results that they are seeing?
Yeah, so Mississippi is our best example. So I don't have the exact, but I think it was something like a 30-point increase in percentages from their proficiency rating on the NAEP test. They use letters, but they also have been very, again, great about sharing about that it's not just connecting teachers with training, it really is the coaching and the mentoring and the support. And so a lot of their plans, they're doing webinars, they're sharing out, they're having people come and visit. And so we're paying attention to not only what was the training, but then what was the implementation? How did it look to move from teachers knowing something to having that opportunity to try it out in the classroom? it takes practice and it takes safe practice. If you're going to change what you do, sometimes it's easier to do that one-on-one with a colleague than it is in front of 22 first graders for the first time you do it. And so Mississippi's been great about saying, here's the training we did, but then here's how we implemented to get the results that we saw.
Are there any charter schools that have used
I do know
like
that
smaller examples than
the whole state of
than
Mississippi.
and that's great. An
Yeah.
entire state is a pretty strong statement, but
Yep.
I'm
Here
just
in
wondering
Min-
if there's anywhere where it's smaller and easier to track the level of implementation and what was done, where it doesn't vary so much.
Right. I think the challenge in Minnesota is that letters only really became available to teachers in Minnesota less than 2 years ago. And that because it was, so letters is expensive, I will also say that. So when MDE offered the free tuition, the first come, first serve, there was a lot of districts who jumped on board then. And then there were some districts who, like us, decided that they would follow suit and they would begin by paying the fee to have teachers do the letters training. I would say most districts are not doing a full scale like we're doing. Anoka is doing all of their K2, but again, they're just starting down the path. So I don't know, Al, if we're far enough along as a state yet to be able to see the full impact. Knowing that it does take 5 years to really train and implement, there isn't a district or a charter here in Minnesota that's at that level yet. So we do need to look to other states, and that's why it's kind of all eyes on Mississippi right now.
During our dyslexia presentation, it was mentioned that we're learning things through the process, through the process of teaching for dyslexia, or the process of, the curriculum and things. We're learning things through that. And I believe someone said that we're going to be making some significant changes. Is that this?
This is this, yes.
Okay, so on the one slide where you had you didn't really talk about it, but the bottom piece, which was the highest level of intervention, was students with
Yep.
dyslexia. So that's
Right, so
this
letters.
is a piece of that.
This will be a piece of that, right? So we think about effective first instruction and we think about prevention. Without the systematic instruction that we talked about in the presentation, our dyslexic students they're going to struggle. But by providing the code base, this is what your mouth does, this is why these rules work the way that they do, being really explicit and not leaving it to chance really helps our dyslexic students make those connections in their brain about how the language works, how to unlock it. And like I said, it's good for all kids. So this is right in line with how we support our dyslexic students. We'll continue to do our Sunday interventions, continue to have that programming. Sunday is very much aligned with the science of reading. And so we have some of those pieces in place, but this gives us the opportunity to expand our teacher knowledge and have, when Anne says, I know exactly what to do. For every one of my students, I don't think most of our teachers would be able to say right now, any kid can come to me with a challenge in reading and I know where to start and what to do, and letters will give them that.
One of the things, this was just, it was brought up to me today, and I said that I would share it because I do think it's a piece, but you had a slide that showed District 742 results. And as we often do in this district, we list one of the categories as Black. And that's a big category in our district now. It's 50% plus of our students. But Black includes a large number of EL students. And if we don't disaggregate that, we're really showing a poor representation of where Black students actually are. And I think we show, I forget what we showed on the screen, but it was around, was it? Yeah, it was somewhere right in there, and it's actually non-ELL Black students are 34.8% proficient, which is much higher than what we're showing. And I think I think it's important to disaggregate that.
Yeah, it does. It gives us a
Something like
different
that.
picture. It's a different
Does
way to
give
look
us a
at the
very
data.
different picture. And not just with, it's not just a starting point, but it's also, it's a confidence piece too. We aren't absolutely completely failing with Black students, much worse than many other districts who don't have the high level of EL students. We're actually doing much better. Our Black students, non-EL, are actually doing very, very much, performing better than other similar districts. And so both for our teachers and for our Black students, I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Anyone else? Scott? And then Natalie?
Laura, thank you. I think that you're a really great public speaker. And you helped us understand something that is obviously not very easily understood, since we haven't done it for hundreds of years in this country in our education. So the reason we know it now is specifically because of how we can study the brain. Is that why we know it now, but we never knew it before?
That's a big part of it. Yep. We can, one of the things that I learned when I was starting in my science of reading journey is just that we now know that every single letter, or the eyes look at every single letter and process every single letter when we read. That's not something that we knew. So there was these hunches that you looked at word parts, or you kind of looked at the beginning of the word, and then your brain just kind of did that work for you. But now we're literally able to see and slow down that your brain is processing every single letter when it's reading a word. We're also able to see the parts that light up. We're able to see what happens when we give students the type of intervention, the code-based, systematic, explicit instruction. We're able to see for dyslexic students what parts of their brain aren't firing or activating, or there's not as much activity when they are receiving instruction, and then what happens. We can look to see the brain growth, we can look to see the connections that are developed, and so that's a big part of it, that it's really not disputed. We're actually able to see exactly what's going on.
It's almost like there's a little bit of grief or something in this for me, because, not for me personally, but for our kids and for our teachers especially, who oh, that's how I was supposed to teach it all these years, and I wish I would have known, and we threw so much at the wall that didn't work because we didn't know any better until now. So it's
Grief is exactly what I've experienced, right?
Yeah.
So Zach referenced Sold a Story. That was a huge grieving process for me as a teacher. It really weighs heavy on my heart, because I should have made different choices, but when you know better, you do better. But I recently read something from the Minnesota Department of Ed, what administrators need to know as teachers embark on letters, and it called out there's some feelings that people have to go through as they embark on this journey.
Yeah. As a person who was trained in education all those years ago, like you said, I think we're about the same age. And I wasn't a reading teacher, as a music teacher, but I remember going into my first school, and my first school that I taught in was 96% free and reduced lunch. I had one class of one trimester of college about teaching kids that are struggling in poverty. And that was all my kids almost in my classroom. And so it's that was the feeling, I'd been taught how to do something, but not in a real world way. And I don't blame my teachers. In college, they were teaching how they were supposed to be teaching, but I'm glad to see that we're moving forward, even though we can grieve a little bit. I just want to say that if in science of reading, if in the definition you said the word preponderance, I'm like, that's a little bit funny. That like in the definitions, there's these words that really you have to decode. But yeah, it's interesting. The last thing I'll say is when I went to teach in Georgia, people would say to me from here, well, at least you're not teaching in Mississippi because they're 50th. And so how much, we have so much to learn from a state who's already like, you know where we are now in Minnesota versus where we were 20 or 30 years ago? They've been sitting in that grief, like, what do we do, what do we do? And they're ahead of us because they've been where we were longer, but it's great that we have them to learn from.
It's a common reaction when Mississippi is the one to look at.
Yes, and they can lead us now. Thank you, Laura.
Yep, you're welcome.
I was at the Paramount the other day and I was chatting with a parent, and the parent says, my kids don't know how to read. And my response was, I don't think we know how to teach them to read. And by golly, you're right. And we just haven't known how to do it. And for all these years. And I think that the COVID really brought that out to parents. Because they were sitting at home with their kids on their laptops, and the kids weren't learning. And I think we finally hit on something. And that's what I told the parent. I think finally we've hit on something. I don't know what it is, but I think we've got it because we're teaching dyslexia methods to the general population. And I think that's kind of what you're doing.
Right, so we're taking a look at what is it that is the most impactful and efficient and effective way. One of the literacy experts that I follow on Twitter said something like, sure, you can take a different approach, but it won't be as impactful or effective. So why would we choose that path? By looking at what struggling readers need, we're able to also say what would happen if we gave all kids what struggling readers need, and what we know now is that it will benefit all of them.
Yeah. I know that an awful lot of what did work in the old days. And it seems to be a large part of what's working with your system too.
Well, it's not my system, Scott.
Well, okay. Whatever you want to call it. You're the presenter.
Yes.
But phonics and decoding, that seems to be an awful lot of the method.
Yes, it's critical, and I think that we have maybe underestimated its importance in recent years. When we think about some of those myths that if we teach kids just enough and give them books, they'll pick it up, it'll develop naturally, and that we know isn't really true. And so I'll share a quick little story. And I'll be vulnerable, so I'm going to be vulnerable with all of you. So as I've been going through the science of reading and learning all of these things about how the brain learns to read, just so happened that I also have been reading aloud to my children who are older. My children are 6th grade and 9th grade, and so you don't get to just read them like Charlotte's Web anymore. You have to read a complex text. And so I've been reading aloud to my children, and I would say I'm a proficient reader, right? I got this reading down. But what I have noticed as I've read aloud a complex text is that I have never been taught advanced phonics, right? And so if I'm reading to myself and I get to a word that I don't necessarily know in speech, or I'm not able to decode, which happens, I think, to all of us, right? We saw it when we were looking at Greek or when we're talking about preponderance. I've noticed that as an adult reader who's reading silently, I would just skip that word, right? I have enough reading skills that I would go on, and I probably would have not noticed the gaps that I have. So even as an adult reader, now through this experience of reading to my children, I am able to say I was not given advanced phonics, and I can tell you that my 6th grader often is better at decoding than I am because of the gaps that I had in my own education. That's not easy to say, but I share it because it's reality. I read and write every single day. I don't struggle with it, but yet by having this experience, I notice the gaps that I have, and I can only imagine what gaps our students have as they're going through their lives and trying to make sense of text and print.
I did quite a bit of reading to my kids, and at one point I was pointing out to each word as I read it, and I think it helped.
It did.
Is it- Well, it's nice to know, because it was just a guess. But yeah, just point as I read the word. And it's like I was trying to teach them the whole word rather than the parts of the word. When I was in 7th grade, we had a social studies teacher that used to read aloud to the class. And it was really interesting. And I think the class was almost learning to read through her word recognition.
Yeah, that could have been.
I think that's about it. You're doing good work. Thank you.
This is maybe more for you, Lori. It seems like about 6 months ago, when we were having our math presentation, it was very similar, or had a lot of similar statements were made. Like, you know, kids, yeah, and a new way of looking at math. Different kids learn differently, and so we try to find the approach that's going to work for them to help them basically decode how to do math. And are these born of the same place? Are they coming from the same place? Is there a really cool acronym for numbers?
No, ours was CRA, right? Concrete Representational Abstract, right? So I think in some ways, maybe what you're referencing is picking up on some of those. They both in some ways describe the thinking processes that happen as they're acquiring the new skills, right? So they're first learning one-to-one, right? Like that concrete. And so I think, you know, the understanding of the sound match to the letter, right? I think that then allows the brain to build on the base process, right? So I think that they are similar in that regard. I don't know if Kay or Laura want to add on to that.
They each have their own approach, I will say that. And some of the approaches with math are a little bit different than language arts. But Lori's right. The fact that we know that when students are able to have really explicit, whether that's instruction or explicit opportunities to really make meaning, they learn better. And so in math, a lot of times that's hands-on, but that's also hands-on in literacy. We know that when we activate senses, when we're teaching kids sounds and phonics, when we use tactile, you saw the child making the letter M in the video. When we use tactile, when we use different approaches, that makes learning more meaningful, especially for our youngest learners. So that's a crossover between math and reading. How do we get kids really actively learning? And that will help them really own that learning in their brains.
Monica?
So a couple of things. What was the teacher in the video that it wasn't that thing that
Oh, wasn't that
doing?
cute?
Yeah.
I don't know what she was doing. I want to know too. I think that's just Carol Ramler. She's amazing. So she was probably doing something that was engaging and physical with her students. My guess would be she was doing some sort of letter or sound correspondence, but she's incredible.
The other thing that you were saying about your own deficits, and thank you for sharing that. My question is how, what do you know about how, at what age do you learn how to read? And I'm thinking more about, well, let's say corrective, but how much adults are going to be able to learn how to read, like those ways your brain, they don't occur the same when you're little and when you're adult.
So it's still the same practice. So if we take an adult that doesn't know how to read, we still would use the same process to help them orthographically map. We would teach them, a lot of times a barrier is that people don't actually hear all the sounds, right? So in order to be able to write or spell, we have to hear all the sounds. We have to know what letters combine together to produce those sounds. But for some people, that's a bit of a mystery. So what we do know is that younger is better. We know that for students who are behind in reading, for example, or who need some additional support, that in kindergarten, what the research shows us is that about 10 to 20 minutes a day will help to kind of close that gap. But as students get older, once they get up into 5th grade, we need much more time to be able to do that because there are many more skills. So the process we would take with an adult wouldn't be different, but it may take longer because that adult, that essentially that gap between what should be known at that age and what is known would be greater.
Anyone else? Go ahead.
In that chart that showed the statistics, the state of Minnesota was around this almost 60%. And I noticed that our white kids were almost 60%. And the rest were not. Is that because of the language comprehension?
It could be. We know that both are equally important, right? And so we know that no matter the background of a student, that language comprehension and word recognition are important. We also know that that varies from family to family. The language comprehension that happens in a household varies. We also know that access to texts and books varies depending on lots of circumstances. And so students who have a home where there is a lot of language, access to books, right, they tend to have more language comprehension, but that doesn't solve everything, right? We saw that formula. Having the language comprehension without the word recognition won't lead to reading comprehension. So I don't know that we can make a direct connection there. It's probably lots of factors, but we know that all students need both, and we have to provide both for all students.
Does ADHD have an impact on this?
Yep, it does. And we know that, like from the research with dyslexia, that students who are dyslexic are more likely to have ADHD as well. So that can provide another level of challenge. But we also know that we know how to teach kids to read, right? And that's such a reassuring thing, that if a student comes to us with a challenge, whether it's ADHD or something else, that their brain learns to read in the same way. So we can activate the processes within the classroom. We can do it in lots of ways: whole group, small group, hands-on, one-on-one. But we can know the path forward no matter what challenge comes our way.
Okay. 'Cause I have a young adult who's really intelligent and has tremendous language skills, but can't read. And I'm trying to figure out why. But the ADHD is one of the problems. She said, I can't focus. Is there a method to do something for kids that can't focus?
I think we have to address both pieces there, right? So how do we help that child take a look at their needs in the area of focus, right? Because not being able to focus would impact being able to access instruction. But what I think is great about the science of reading is that it's highly engaging, it's highly interactive. When you watch classrooms where teachers are engaging their students in practices, there's a lot of movement with kids using their hands and their fingers, kids doing a lot of talking, a lot of interaction. Kids aren't passively listening, kids are really engaged, and that helps anyone focus to be highly engaged in the learning.
I have to admit, I can't wrap my mind around, this is huge, and so how you're going to accomplish this. But I was so thankful to hear those three voices, and so I hope that those voices can be heard.
All of our staff saw those same three voices
Okay,
today
good.
too. So they were very much a huge part of messaging that went out to staff today too.
Because that's got to make a big impact, because this is a big commitment on the district's level, on individually, on our teachers' levels, just because it's not a quick one-and-done lesson. So hours upon hours upon hours and a long, multiple year pathway to get this done. So thank you. We all look forward to being the next Mississippi, I guess. So
Right.
that is just weird.
You are welcome.
Who would have thought? Yeah, but for this making a difference. Wow. Well, yeah, that's right. We'll be back on top. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, moving along tonight. Last item up here, we have the schools update. We have Kay Nelson, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, and Dr. Mike Rivard, Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Education.
Good evening, Chair Haas, Dr. Putnam, and members of the board. Just give me one moment. I'll see if I can get this up. And there we go, I hope. Good evening. We're here this evening to talk through how things have gone through March during our monthly update. So we will start off like we usually do with preschool. And this past month, our preschoolers have been applying math concepts to learning. And as you look at our pictures on the sides here, you see our preschoolers counting with manipulatives and also doing some single-digit addition. But then they're using those skills to incorporate looking at patterns. When using math manipulatives, you see their red blocks and their blue blocks. But what they wanted to do even more so was with their safety vests on, they started building, and they're using some of those same math skills in this guided play activity. So while building, the students are incorporating patterns and math addition to build a structure that they hopefully will stay and see standing. Saws and hammers lend tools to making this activity more realistic and also showing how important teamwork is and all those smiles. But it's not all work at preschool. Dramatic play and nursery rhymes continue to be an important and fun activity for our preschoolers, just like when we were kids. So I'll ask you to listen as we play out a little bit of drama and listen for the Itsy Bitsy Spider. It'll work. And everyone take a bow. That's how that kind of ended. So we still see those fun activities and things happening in our preschools, even as we work on math patterns and our reading skills. Moving on to our elementary schools, had a wonderful month in March of getting ready for spring and have started to kind of turn the page. We see that at Kennedy, where our kindergarteners, I'm supposed to make up the pun of that word, our kindergarteners were busy this last month harvesting lettuce that they grew in an aeroponic garden towers in the cafeteria. They were so proud to eat the plants that they had grown. It took approximately 6 weeks for their lettuce, spinach, and kale to grow from seedlings to leaves large enough for them to eat. Our nutritional services staff taught the students about proper cleaning of their food before they started working on eating that fun things that they have grown. At Clearview, students and staff celebrated the end of the trimester, which was this past month, with some dress-up days and an assembly to celebrate all that their accomplishments of the things that they did during the winter. And with the end of One District, One Book reading campaign in February, Madison continues to find ways to keep our students reading with different activities in March. This is one of my favorites because on this day I stopped over and flashlight reading was happening in the library. I felt like a kid again underneath the covers, but these guys were in the media center and they were excited about this event, and all grade levels got to go through and do some reading with their flashlights going on. And it was as quiet as a mouse for that reading time. For these Discovery students, they said they were celebrating when I stopped into Discovery and toasting the end of winter with their sambusas during lunchtime. Although when I looked at our little girl on the left, I did notice that she still had her snow pants with her, so she was not taking any chances. And I think Dr. Putnam could talk a little bit about that over the last couple weeks too. Finally, I just wanted to highlight an annual celebration that we have with our Chinese immersion program. The Chinese immersion concert took place this last week on March 30th. After I believe they had to reschedule at least 2 times due to some of our weather events that have happened. This event is for kindergarten through 8th graders who have participated in Chinese immersion. Students gather together in Chinese dress. They perform at the Ritchie Auditorium at St. Cloud State University, and it is a wonderful celebration that I know I probably attended back in 2007 or 2008. So it's just magnificent to see that it's still going on as a celebration, all things related to Chinese immersion programming.
Kindergartner song.
I don't have that, Zach, but we'll put that in there for next month. So. That concludes how things have been going in March for our elementary schools.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rivard. Moving on to secondary schools. This month, I'm going to be highlighting how our middle schools are living out our strategic plan, goal number 1 of creating a positive school climate and culture, and how our high schools are supporting our strategic plan, goal 4 of career and post-secondary educational options. First up, we have North Junior High. And at North, I'm highlighting their PBIS Students of the Month. They had a breakfast that was held on March 24th, and it was a special recognition of our students who go above and beyond to make North a welcoming and positive place. And these students are a wonderful role model for their peers. And so they were able to invite a guest in and have breakfast together and celebrate. Okay, and moving on to Kennedy. Kennedy has been focusing on spreading kindness, and you can see student work exuding this message throughout the school. In addition to the kindness focus, the students have been talking about safe and appropriate use of social media and being online. So the top, whoops, can you go back one? Yep, the top 2 posters on the left here show them creating tips for all of us to follow as we are using our social media and interacting with others online. You can go ahead. Another way they are building a positive culture and climate is through music. And our Kennedy Orchestra students have been engaging in serenading staff who have birthdays. And so that was kind of a cool little thing that they're doing. And Aurora McMillan is our amazing Northside Orchestra teacher. So do you want to play that one? It is. It's almost Dr. Putnam's birthday. We could probably get them to come over. All right, and moving on to South Junior Highs. South Junior High is back at it again with another fun-filled Spirit Week. They are the champions of that. Students and staff participated in several theme days, including Pajama Day, City versus Country Day, Twins Day, Sports Day, and Pink Day. In a shift, go ahead. In a shift to our high schools and career and post-secondary education, our 2 schools hosted a career exploration and job fair on March 15th under the direction of Leah Sams, who's our Director of Career and College Pathways, and our CTE Pathways coordinators, Steve Rotenfeld at Tech and Heidi Paulson at Apollo. Students had the opportunity to connect with many employers and also learn about potential summer jobs. Students completed a passport to show how many employers that they had the opportunity to connect and engage with. So you just looked at the tech pictures, and you can go ahead to, we had a wide variety of employers. It was really neat to see the kids just experience that interacting with adults. This is Apollo. And then students at McKinley experienced a health careers exploration day in conjunction with CentraCare Health. And as you'll be able to see in these photos, there was a variety of things. So they had panel discussions alongside some interactive experiences. Students were able to learn how to take blood pressures, work with medical experts, and so really had that nice exposure to a variety of different careers. One other additional highlight that I don't have a picture of that Principal Sininger wanted me to share with you, that for the first time since COVID, our McKinley students were able to work with the veterans over at the VA last week, and they made gift baskets and brought those over, and we were able to have conversations with some of our veterans, and they were really excited to be able to do that again. And then our last but not least, I wanted to celebrate the continued efforts of our school to build bridges between each other. Last month, I highlighted some of our Eagle connections, and this month I wanted to share a fantastic Tiger connection. On March 2nd, South Junior High hosted our Southside Middle and High School families with their culture night. Families sampled foods, learned about many cultures through presentations, performances, and hands-on learning activities. It was a huge success that brought in lots of people, and it was very fun for all who attended. And coming up on April 27th is their final Southside Family Night, and that one will be focused on college and career, and that will be held at Tech High School. Really neat events to see the older kids interacting with the younger kids, and being excited to be back in South. I couldn't believe how small it was, so it's really neat to see what's happened. So, and that's what we have for you tonight.
Thank you. Yes.
I have a comment. I was watching, is that on? Yeah, it's on. I was watching the one from North, and there was a picture in there that had one of the pull-down screens on it. It was up. I bet it hasn't been pulled down for a couple of years, but it just made me think with all of the changes that are going on and how quickly they happen. Because we used to have one of those right up here. It's gone. And we had a projector up here, and we projected stuff on that. But we only did that for a couple of years, because I don't think it was more than 2 or 3 years before that when, say, Amy would come and give a financial presentation. It was an overhead projector with pieces of plastic that you'd put on there, and the light would shine through, and you'd put a piece of paper over it and pull it down, the LED sign. And I mean, it's only been like 5 or 6 years. That's not a long time ago. Just when you think about how fast things change, now everything's on these. Where will it be in a couple of years? Well, I'll be wearing goggles.
All right. Well, thank you. That was a great night. Looking for a motion to adjourn our work session. Oh, do we have, I don't think we.
So moved.
Yep, that's next week. Do I have a second? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Work session is adjourned. It is 8:43 PM. Have a good night. I just don't think that anybody would. Oh my God, they're not the cutest things ever. Oh, I mean, look at that.
Kindergartners have been Chinese version.
They are very enthusiastic, aren't they? Oh, sure.